Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by BuckeyeHuddle.com. I'm Marc Givler. We got Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com here with us today. There is a lot to get through. This could probably be two shows. We're going to try and do this in one. January is shaping up to be a very interesting recruiting month for Ohio State. The Buckeyes land five-star cornerback Devin Sanchez, who ranked by most as the number one corner in the country in 2025. I've kind of said reminds me a lot of Jeff Okudah. Just a huge get. Yeah, that's I know, high praise. Huge get for them over the weekend at the All-American Bowl. Could be the first domino here, Tony, of many defensive dominoes to fall just in the month of January. So let's kind of dive into this. Zahir Mathis, 6'6", 230-pound edge out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the greatest city on earth. Imhotep charter, probably underranked in the mid-50s, 60s. If you're a defensive end from Philly, should probably be ranked in the top 5 overall. It's probably a good starting point. But, so much angst about defensive end recruiting the last couple cycles. Mathis comes off the board on Wednesday. I feel very good about Ohio State here. Tony, how big would this be just given what we've seen the last two cycles where they've gotten off to these they're going to get these big guys and then they get maybe one of them, but they don't get all of them. And they kind of have this thing at the end where they come up short of their number. How important would this be to kind of get one in the barn early?
Well, I think that's the difference, right, is getting the guy in the barn, because they've had trouble with that in the past few years where they lead for this guy, they lead for Dylan Stewart, they lead for this guy, they lead for that guy, but nobody pulls the trigger and says, okay, I'm committing. And to get Zahir Mathis, if they can, this early, that allows them to build that relationship, but also maybe tell the rest of the nation, like, hey, it's okay. It's still okay for pass rushers to come to Ohio State. Edric Houston, I think, helps that as well. But yeah, this guy is certainly interesting. I don't know how many guys over the years that they have landed like this, who is this long and this tall as a pass rusher. I'm not going to talk about Chase Young. We'll go ahead and leave. Don't ever want to put that on anybody, but just the kind of physical makeup that he has is very interesting. They've missed out on guys like this in the past, but if you get him locked up, almost like 11 months before he has to sign, obviously you're going to have to continue to work on him, and changes may happen on the coaching staff, but it's better than the alternative. And the last few years, they've just been dealing with the alternative.
Yeah, I don't know if this will be a bigger relief for the coaching staff or the fan base to get, if they can get one in there early. It just hasn't been easy the last couple of years. Quite frankly, even going back 3 years ago, when they did land their guys, those went late. Caden Curry went late. Amari Abor went late. Kenyatta Jackson was like a late summer. They didn't have a guy like this in the fold. It's been several cycles. And so if you're listening, they're getting both Jeff Okudah 2.0 and Chase Young 2.0, according to Tony.
Same class, 2017.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, this would be a huge pickup for them to get this one early and kind of just, okay, there's one. Let's go get another one, and let's go get another one. I think they're going to want probably at least 3 in this class, and you might cap it there because at some point roster spacing has to matter a little bit. But this is a big cycle for defensive ends, and they need to come away with several good ones, and so this would be a great start. Again, I have no reason to think he's not going to pick Ohio State. He's developed a great relationship with Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson's been recruiting him since his freshman year when he was recruiting. He was also there recruiting Eni White, who ended up signing with Texas A&M. So there's been a long, ongoing relationship there. I first saw Zahir his freshman year. They played Pittsburgh Central Catholic, and I think he's only like 210, 215 pounds at the time, but you could kind of just see he's like this kind of almost like a baby giraffe out there. He's like all arms and legs. And he's like, boy, if he fills out, that's going to be interesting. And he's really, I saw him again last summer, and the progress he's made. He's probably up 20, 30 pounds from where I'd seen him as a freshman. And so he's right in that like 230 range right now, which is kind of where you want him. Maybe you want him at 235, 240 coming onto campus, because that's about what Chase Young was. Like, I think people get this like notion because Chase Young's playing in the NFL at 270 or whatever. Chase Young can come in at 270. Chase Young was 235.
Well, what about Zach Harrison is another one that just popped into my mind. Yep. Tall, lanky. Like, how do they compare?
Yeah, I think that's probably the more fair comparison at this point, just because of how good Chase was. It's just such a high bar there. But body type wise, I think that's a very good comparison. They're very similar. They're kind of all arms and legs, explosive. I think this, I think Zach had an underrated career at Ohio State. Did he ever have like the 12 sack season? No. Was pretty darn good against the run. Had enough sacks, has had a nice start to his career in Atlanta. I mean, he's been a really good player. I think Zahir is a little more bendy. I think he's a little more flexible coming around the edge, but body type wise and just where they're at physically, I think is probably a pretty fair comparison at this point. So that's one. That's Wednesday. There's another one coming up. Dorian Brew, Ohio native, was at Clayton Northmont up until like October. Moved to Texas in the middle of the fall. Moved to Conroe, Texas. Down there, it's north of Houston. He has been a top defensive back target here the last couple of years. Tony, you saw him with all of us at camp. Big athletic kid. He has now set a decision date for January 24th. So we'll dive into that here. But, just again, this is a guy you've seen. Your thoughts, what you saw at camp from Dorian.
Yeah. And were they there? Were he and Devin Sanchez there the same day? Or
I believe
just
so.
Watching, just getting the opportunity to see them both so close together. But the thing that struck me about Dorian Brew is just how tall and long he is, where you see these guys, you're like, well, I know they say he's a corner, but you don't see corners like that. So you kind of just assume he's going to end up somewhere else, but ran well, was always taking teaching and was good to talk to. And, this was obviously before he moved to Texas, but when you've got a guy like that in Ohio, you just assume, well, Ohio State's not going to let him out of the state and they're going to wrap him up. And you see the way Tim Walton has been recruiting of late, and that makes it even easier to think. But yeah, I was impressed with him, and it's camp. It is what it is. But to see him, and he was clearly ahead of just about everybody else there, and Devin Sanchez was as well. Like you can tell the standouts, and he was one of those. But yeah, the thing that struck me most, it's kind of like first time I saw Davis Igbenos in camp at Ohio State in practice wearing Sonny Styles' old number of 20. It didn't register that wasn't Sonny Styles because he's a tall, like Davis Igbenos is 6'2", 6'2.5". And that's kind of what Dorian Brew is. And they look unnaturally big, but they move. I guess they also move unnaturally well.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing with Dorian is, will he stay outside a corner? Is he more maybe like a free safety with his speed and his size? I think they'll figure that one out later. It'll give him some flexibility if they land him. But that's another one. I think Ohio State's in great shape to get that done. Obviously, he's made his decision internally by setting an announcement date for just kind of 2 weeks down the road. You know where you're going at that point when you do that this early in the process. So feel very good about Ohio State. The interesting thing about this is, so he moves down to Texas. He's like, I want to say like 30 minutes north of where Devin Sanchez is. They're close in proximity. And so they had kind of struck up a little bit of a communication. I think going back from the summer camp and everything else, they'd kind of struck up a relationship. And when Dorian moved to Texas in the middle of the year, he had his first game at Conroe. Devin Sanchez didn't play that day. Devin Sanchez went to his game. at Conroe. So they have been in constant communication. When we sat down with Devin last week ahead of his commitment, he had told me, like, yeah, I'm going to be working on Dorian. We talk all the time. Devin reached out to Dorian after his All-American Bowl announcement. So this is all like, I don't think this is all coincidence. I think this is very well orchestrated. And I think Ohio State's about to get some more good news here in a couple of weeks. But gosh, Devin Sanchez is already like becoming a huge part. And he told me when we sat down, like, I'm going to be recruiting. I'm going to use my status as, a 5-star prospect from Texas to like try and get other prospects, whether it's on defense. Well, he's going to recruit Carter Lowe, the offensive tackle. He's like, I don't even care if it's offense. So he's been doing a great job already.
Well, and you need those in every class. Usually coaches will say it's nice when the quarterback does that. And obviously Tavian St. Clair is going to be doing some of that, but it'll take anybody. You can let anybody do it. Mike Brewster in 2008, the Brew Crew, like, it doesn't matter who's doing it. Just go recruit. And with Devin Sanchez, talking about the 2017 class, and you had Sean Wade in there as well as a 5-star guy, but just in the Texas aspect of that alone, with Jeff Okuda, Baron Browning, J.K. Dobbins, you've got here, Devin Sanchez and Dorian Brew. Maybe, is there anybody else in Texas that they can go and get to kind of mirror what they did in 2017?
Yeah, I mean, they're recruiting Torrey Blaylock. He's part of that massive 2025 running back crew that we're going to have to, that might be one of the most fascinating. I'm sure O-line, D-line will probably be the main focal points for the fans, but I think right up there with that is how are they going to piece this running back thing together with, 7 guys they're in on or whatever, and 2 in Ohio and everything. So yeah, I mean, there's some other guys here. It's interesting. They struggled for years in the Houston area. They could get the Dallas Fort Worth guys, but every time they tried to go down to Houston, it was just like something would go wrong. Marvin Wilson, Anthony Cook. We can kind of go through the list. Kendall Sheffield the first time around until they got him back once he transferred in. Just a lot of misses. They break through. They get Donovan Jackson, get Devin Sanchez now. Is Dorian Brew really a Houston kid? No, but it's interesting how this is kind of morphed, because I was looking at this the other day for like travel stuff for the spring, and I'm like, man, it's mostly Houston area. It's not as much Dallas Fort Worth as it kind of used to be. So yeah, they're going to be a factor, I think, in Texas this year again. And I think, like I said, Devin Sanchez is like, okay, just, tell me who I need to go get type of thing. And so he's already working on that. It's got this feel, and we don't want to lose Blake Woodby in all this, who's a fantastic corner out of Baltimore St. Francis. But if you add Brew to those 2 guys at corner, and Brew is like a corner safety hybrid type, that's an unbelievable start to the secondary. And then you've got Trey McNutt at Shaker Heights. That'll be the next guy. I mean, I've already talked to Devin Sanchez about this. Like, he's like, yeah, we're gonna go hard after Trey McNutt. Trey McNutt was down at the All-American Combine in San Antonio when Devin was down there for his announcement. This is snowballing to be the type of defensive back class that, everyone's going to say, in 10 months could be the number 1 defensive back class in the country.
Well, and the crazy thing is that it starts with the decommitment of Jonte Gilbert, who they had committed for a long time, and obviously way too early, basically, and then he decommits. But to answer with what they've done and what they could be doing is similar to when guys would decommit from Urban Meyer, and he'd go replace them with a 5-star. Or you lose whomever and you go replace him with Mike Mitchell as the number 1 middle linebacker. Obviously, Mitchell didn't necessarily work out, but he was able to find guys to replace guys. And this is beyond that. And another thing that I like about the way things are shaping up is that guys can fit into spots. And I think you talked about it in Skull Session with Blake Woodby being maybe more of a nickel. And you can't get enough defensive backs in in today's game and also in Jim Knowles' defense, when they want 2 outside corners, 2 safeties, and a nickel, and if you're going to bring 5 guys in every year, not everybody's going to work out, so you're going to want to continue to populate this. Guys are going to transfer, as we've seen. But one of the things that's interesting to me nowadays is recruits are perfectly fine being recruited as a nickelback. Like Miles Lockhart, the freshman in this year's class, is brought in, was told, hey, we like you at nickel. And that's cool because nickel is a legitimate position in football nowadays. It's a legitimate position in the NFL. Bradley Roby was drafted to be a nickelback in the first round, a decade ago now. And so it's not one of those things where like, yeah, you're not good enough to play outside, but we'd like you inside. That's not a good sell job. The sell job is we really like what you could do on the inside. That's one of the things they told Jordan Hancock when they were recruiting him. That's finally coming to pass, and you're seeing how well he played there. But with the way things are shaken out, and even Bryce West talked to him last year or so. He's like, yeah, I could play some slot as well. So it's just interesting to see the way guys have embraced the different kind of roles, even at running back, where guys are like, yeah, I want to share carries now, to see the way the specialization of the game, I guess.
Yeah, there's no longer a stigma on like the nickel corner position. It's getting more valued at the NFL level. It's getting the pay is getting better at the NFL level, and a lot of that is the different creative offense. Like you play the Vikings, Justin Jefferson's going to line up in the slot on a lot of his reps. Marvin Harrison's going to play in this. I mean, you can see Marvin in the slot in the NFL. They're moving. AJ Brown plays in the slot for the Eagles quite a bit. They're moving their best receivers. They're cross-training the receivers, which now makes that nickel. You're no longer just getting the 5'9" shifty slot receivers. You're now having to match up with Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, or because they're moving them into the slot to get these matchups. So you have to counter by playing a legitimate guy there. It can no longer just be the guy who can handle the little quick guys. You've got to be able to be physical. You've got to be able to do a lot of different things. So it's an adjustment being made to what offenses are doing with their star receivers. We've got some more defensive news. This is going to be like pretty much a defensive recruiting show at this point. We'll talk about, we're going to put a bow on the All-American Bowl here as well at the end, but that's kind of 25 right now. Zahir Mathis on deck Wednesday, Dorian Brew announcing on the 24th, both looking good for Ohio State right now. Some other guys, again, Trey McNutt's one to watch. We'll see how quickly that comes together. But I know Ohio State's that's going to be the next guy they kind of turn their focus to. And I don't mean the Ohio State coaches. They've been focused on Trey McNutt. I mean, like Devin Sanchez and assuming Dorian Brew's in, it's going to just kind of snowball here. But there's a little bit of 2024 stuff going on right now. We've been talking a lot about Dominic Kirks, 4-star defensive lineman, Painesville, Ohio, Riverside High School. Committed to Washington, didn't sign. A lot of that was Ohio State and USC have been pushing. Ohio State's not offered yet, but Dominic Kirks is going to make an official visit. We've talked about this for a month or two now. Wait for the official. Once the official gets scheduled, then we know it's on. I think they're going to offer him. They've done a lot of their research here. Like the only good thing to come out of like what's happened with defensive line recruiting this year is that once they were able to get Dominic Kirks to wait, there was a total like deep dive into every aspect of his game, every aspect of his life. Like it was a total staff focus of Larry Johnson, of Jim Knowles, of Ryan Day to get to know as much about Dominic Kirks as they could between, December 20th and February, whatever it is. And so the official visits happened. They're going to certainly get out to a basketball game of his at some point and get to watch him. But the argument is he an end? Is he a tackle? I don't think it matters. Do you think it matters, Tony? I just, like I said today, I don't think we have too many good defensive linemen is just never a thing.
No, I don't think it matters, especially when on passing downs, you might be going with 3 defensive linemen. You can put him at an end, and he's whether he's a 3-tech or a defensive end, you want a pass rusher. That's what you're going to get there. And I remember asking Larry Johnson about Draymond Jones, and he came to Ohio State. He was injured, got injured in basketball. And I said, Larry, where's Draymond Jones going to end up? He's like, I have no idea. We'll find out when he's playing in terms of, is he going to be defensive end? Because that's what he was in high school. And he obviously turned into a very good defensive tackle. And I think that's the situation here. Now, what does a player want? That's a consideration as well. But once you get too big, then you've got to kind of reassess. Like, Jayshon Cornell was at one time the number one player in the nation as a defensive end, and at least according to ESPN, and those rankings being what they are, but grew into a tackle, and then actually had to play some defensive end after being a tackle at Ohio State. So things fluctuate, needs fluctuate. That's why if you have a guy that can do both, you have a guy that can be versatile, you can mold them into whatever you need and then let them, grow from there. I mean, John Simon, for instance, was a 5-star or 3-star, depending on the scouting service, defensive tackle. And he started out at Ohio State as a defensive tackle, moved and became an all Big Ten defensive end, and then played linebacker in the NFL for a little bit as an outside linebacker. So you just get him in, figure it out, just basically assess. And yes, this guy can play here. We don't know which spot, but we know he can play here. Then you bring him in. And if the official visit is still on, and at this point, I don't think they would turn it off now. Like, the offer has to be there, right? Like, they're not going to bring him in without an offer.
I think
not offer him.
Yeah, I think unless something goes poorly on the visit, something doesn't click for whatever reason, and I have no reason to think that'll happen. Usually it does. I mean, it's very rare that it does happen that way, but I think you're bringing them in with the notion that at least by the end of the visit, there's going to be an offer there. So that's what I think is going to happen. Personally, I think he's probably a 3-tech. I think Draymond Jones is a good comparison. He's probably an inch taller than Draymond, but he's about the same build. I think Draymond reported to Ohio State around 265. That's probably around what Kirks is going to report to his college of choice as. But this is moving in a very optimistic direction if you're an Ohio State fan that wants Dominic Kirks in this class. And so
it was just interesting to me when we were watching this unfold on signing day, and just randomly checking Twitter. Hey, Dominic Kirks is not signed yet, and then just following. You're making calls, making texts, and it was just interesting to watch it unfold in real time as just something new every year on signing day.
Yeah, that was interesting on the live. Like, hey, kind of checking with some people, like, is there a technology issue or the feedback? Yeah, like, it was very much like, no, like, I think he's just not signing. And then we found out, I think the show was over, but we, like, later that night, it was like, yeah, he's not gonna, I got word he was not gonna sign in the early period. And so here we are. Again, I think this is a very optimistic thing right now. Just the visit, the delay. Obviously, he wanted to hear more of what USC and Ohio State had to say. And Washington's had a great year. They've done a good job, really developing defensive linemen recently. And so it's not so much, I think, about Washington as it just is like, homeschool's calling, and let me really think about this. So again, I'm optimistic that the offer's coming. And if the offer comes, I think that's also a good sign that, because what we talk about, well, you wouldn't bring him in without offering. Would you offer if you weren't pretty sure you're going to get him, is the other side of this coin. Because if you're Ohio State, you don't really want to be embarrassed at the end and like offer the in-state kid. And he's like, I'm just going to stay with Washington. So like, I think there's some of that as well. So I think, yes, you can read into the visit happening as a good sign for the offer, but I think you can read into if the offer happens, that's a good sign toward he's going to take it. So I think there's some of that going on too. It's a little game of chicken at this point, but
yeah.
That's
We'll
how it
give you
works.
this offer if you'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. But it won't be the Denzel Ward thing. Like the Denzel Ward's like my all-time favorite is like, because there's like people like, well, Denzel Ward was a 3-star, but Ohio State knew that he was, like, no, Ohio State, if Ohio State had known that Denzel Ward was a top 10 NFL draft pick, they would have not brought him into the Woody after a camp and said, hey, you've got an offer, but if you walk out of here without taking it, you might not have it. So I don't think they'll do that to Kirks, but I think there will be a feeling out of like, yeah, we think he's going to take it. So we'll see. That'll be something to follow this weekend, obviously. The other thing that happened over the weekend, obviously, was the All-American Bowl. Tony, you got a chance to watch it. Kevin and I were down there for practice. I was at the game. What were just kind of interested to hear your impressions of watching the game, because it is always kind of a different thing. Like there's guys who don't do much in practice throughout the week and then all of a sudden go nuts. Like Garrett Wilson a few years ago did this. And then there's guys who like go insane in practice and just like for whatever reason in the game, it just like maybe don't get the opportunities if they're a receiver or maybe, whatever. And it's not always like a perfect like process of like dominate practice, dominate game, or, don't do much in practice, don't do much in game. It doesn't always work that way. What did you think of the Ohio State guys on Saturday from watching the game?
Well, I mean, it didn't take long to see Jeremiah Smith scoring on the first drive, and then you could tell me how much were they bracketing him, because it didn't seem like there were many opportunities for him the rest of the game. But also, I don't. This may not have been this wasn't the best group of quarterbacks I've seen at this game, and I've seen Lincoln Keenholz last year played very well in this game. Carnell Tate last year played very well in this game. But, obviously would have liked to have seen more from Jeremiah Smith, at least in terms of opportunities. But TJ Moore cooked in his absence. I don't know if they're on the field together, and that's why the attention was towards Jeremiah Smith, and TJ Moore made some catches, and you can see why Ohio State was very interested in him. But I thought Ian Moore looked fine. I think he was one of the better offensive linemen there. The issues weren't necessarily at guard where he was playing. And then Edric Houston had a play early on where he blew up a play. And wow, I know he's a defensive end, but he looks like he's big. And
Really
you
big.
see him and you wonder, how can he stay on the edge and not grow into a 3-tech at some point? Because he just looks like a big boy, basically.
Yeah, he's something. The flexibility and bend he has at his size is crazy. Just unbelievable motor. There were a couple plays he made where, he's coming all the way down the line of scrimmage to make a play at the opposite sideline, getting involved there. Just really a special talent. And yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think he is going to be one of those guys who does play defensive end, but he's going to play it at, 275, 280. He's not going to play it at 260. He's going to just be one of those big kind of classic strong side defensive ends. But, he had a solid practice week. It wasn't like they didn't have a lot to do for the defensive line. He did well in like one-on-ones, but he was kind of able to shine during the game. It was interesting though, the carryover, like, throughout the week, Jeremiah Smith and TJ Moore were by far the two best players on the East. And so we did see that carry over to the game, and it became a thing of, well, you can't really do much with both of them. You're going to have to kind of pick your poison as a defense. And if you want to have some safety help on Jeremiah, well, good luck. TJ Moore's going to feast. And so I think they kind of figured that out. The way the game played out was that, yeah, I mean, you can focus on Jeremiah, but TJ Moore's going to have a monster day too if that happens, and so that did carry over. We didn't get to see a lot. There wasn't a ton of space for James Peoples. He had one awesome run. I think maybe even been a screen where he kind of showed his burst and ran over a guy and just kind of kept forward. That's what I saw out of him during practice. Just great burst, runs super hard. That low center of gravity is going to be he's going to be tough. He's going to be one of those guys who breaks a lot of tackles because there's just not a lot of him to hit.
Yeah, that was the play you're talking about. I tweeted it out. It was just basically just a swing pass near the end zone, out of the end zone.
Mhm.
And yeah, he lowered his head and ran over a dude. And he's a violent runner. He did it a couple of times where he's lowering his shoulder and getting extra yards. And I hear people asking, well, how does he compare to J.K. Dobbins? Because they're both from Texas. And obviously, if you're from Texas, you're like J.K. Dobbins. But like this dude ran hard, and not that J.K. Dobbins didn't, but J.K. Dobbins would make you miss. And James Peoples, I'm sure, can make you miss. But if that's not going to happen, he's going to make you pay for it. And that's what we saw in this one. And yeah, it's always tough in the All-American games, the All-Star games, to see much from the running backs. I think Adrian Peterson back in 2004 at the Army game had a good day. I think Chris Beanie Wells, but it's the rare ones who really go off. And so I'm not too worried about anything there. I will say Damon Williams, a quarterback going to Arizona, pretty fast, pretty quick. Looks like they'll have somebody taking over for them for the Wildcats when their current quarterback moves on. But other than that, anybody else stand out? Did anybody else stand out for you? Because I think we touched on the main guys. I think next year might be an interesting quarterback situation, depending on how those All-American games get split up, though.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that the quarterback play wasn't. I mean, there was no, like last year, Lincoln played so well in the game, but Dante Moore was also fantastic, and there just wasn't a guy like that down there. A couple years ago, Cade Klubnik was down there, was really good. It just wasn't there this year. The star quarterback play. I liked a lot of the defensive linemen on the East. Cover your ears. Amaris Williams had a really good week.
Yeah, Marquise Lightfoot is very thin.
Lightfoot had a good game. He had a sack in the game, or at least made a couple big plays in the backfield. That East defensive line was good. West had some good playmakers at receiver. It was a good group. It wasn't like the best group I've ever seen down there, but it was a really talented group of receivers again. And the Jordan Ship kid that's going to North Carolina, I think, was kind of playing behind Jeremiah Smith and TJ Moore. Every time he would come in, he would do something in practice. So I think that was kind of my takeaways on that. On the West, another cover your ears. Kingston Viliamuasa had a really nice week at linebacker. Made a lot of plays in the game. Was a guy I wasn't at West. I only saw like one West practice. I was mostly focused on East because that's where all the OSU guys were pretty much. But he was good at the practice I saw, and then I'd ask people who were at the other West practices, and he was constantly a name that was brought up. So.
What did you hear about Gatlin Bear, who I think is the fastest player in the nation, was obviously committed to Boise State and is still looking at Michigan, no longer committed anywhere. I saw he had the one time that they went deep to him, he wasn't able to bring it down. And it sounded like maybe that was an issue throughout the week in terms of just securing catches at times.
Yeah, he didn't really do much at the practice I was at. Again, great speed. Was it a quarterback's issue this week with, just not timing or not being able to get him the ball? I don't know, but he didn't really, just had one of those quiet weeks. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. There's been guys who've had quiet weeks, these things, and they go and dominate at the college level, but it was kind of that was a guy I was kind of waiting to see what he would do. And it was kind of a quiet week for him. The other thing is, Morrow Evans, the long snapper, he's going to Ohio State for the West. It's one of those things where it's like, well, I didn't really watch him during the week. What am I going to do? Watch him like snap on the side, like by himself? I'm giving an evaluation of that, but I guess you got to give him an A for the game, right? There were no snapping issues, right? Everything looked fine.
Hey, if nobody knew he was there, then he did a hell of a job.
Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of their West participant. Peyton Pierce did not participate. He's got a little bit of we'll call it a lower body. I don't think it's anything that's going to be super detrimental to him long term in terms of getting out there for the Buckeyes. But it's something he's not able to go right now with. So we'll see when he's like fully available for Ohio State. But so that was kind of it. But it was a good group. Like I said, Jeremiah's special. He's going to be, to me, I think he's going to start day one. Even with the Judkins news, I think James Peoples will play in some capacity this year. The other thing Peoples brings, I mean, he's good out of the backfield catching the ball, but he's a good kickoff returner. I mean, he really kind of hits the seams in kickoff return, and maybe he can get on special teams too this year.
I mean, hey, you're preaching to the choir on actually doing something with the return game for Ohio State. You've got all of these athletes, and for years I understood not necessarily trying to get more than outside the 25-yard line on kickoff returns because you had one of the top offenses in the nation, and 75 yards for C.J. Stroud or Justin Fields or Dwayne Haskins was no big deal. 70 yards for Kyle McCord would have been a lot better than having to go 75, and they didn't really try to do much with the return game. So if they've got somebody that they can trust, they're going to have to turn it over to somebody else because Xavier Johnson is gone. So it's going to be an open position at kick returner. So with all of the athletes that Ohio State has, you should be able to find somebody that is explosive enough. And I've been annoyed for a while at the lack of interest in making the return game a positive aspect for your team. Maybe that will change this year or next year in 2024. We'll see. It's been since 2009 since Ohio State returned to kickoff for a touchdown. So 2010, one of those 2 years, Jordan Hall against Michigan. So they're overdue.
Yeah, I'm not super optimistic about that being tried, but I would do it. I just think, again, and not to like treat these guys as pieces of meat, but like I think one of the arguments you always run into is, well, if we put Marvin Harrison back on punt return and he gets hurt, how ridiculous was that? Well, James Peoples is not going to be your starting running back this year. I mean, that would be a kind of a low leverage move where you're still getting something out of that position, but you're not putting your star running back there necessarily, So
and he feels like a part of the plan.
Yeah,
like he's important.
Yeah, yep. So we'll see about that. I didn't.
Well, Mark, let me ask you this.
Oh, go ahead.
While you're talking about Jeremiah Smith starting from day one, so I put my initial 2 deep on a message board. I'm trying to figure out how the wide receivers are going to shape up, and just in terms of the starting 3. And I asked Tom this same thing, and he copped out and he chickened out. So where are you starting these 3 receivers, whichever 3 they may be, in the opener against, I don't know if it's Western Michigan next year?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, is Ibuka back?
Let's assume he is.
I tend to agree with you, and I think he's one who could very much benefit from coming back, not so much on the personal development level, but more so on the look at all the receivers in this year's draft. Because of your injury, you're like wide receiver 6 or 7 at best. Next year, you could be wide receiver 1 or 2. I mean, so I think there's a lot to gain there. But yeah, I mean, if Ibuka's back, I think what you're likely doing is I think you're playing Tate and Smith on the outside, Ibuka in the slot. But I think you're going to get into this 4-man rotation thing where for not just for NFL purposes for Ibuka, but just for really the benefit of your team is Ibuka can take some snaps outside. You move Ennis into the slot and let, Ibuka play Tate's spot or Smith's spot on a series or something like that. I think you're going to have this 4-man rotation where Ennis and Ibuka are kind of the slot guys, but you're going to let Ibuka kind of play outside as well at times for matchups or whatever you want. And also, of course, again, would help Ibuka to kind of shed he's just a slot receiver label, I think, if he can get some snaps on the outside. So that's what I think's going to happen. We'll see. We'll see how spring plays out. I think the Noah Rogers transfer kind of made that even more realistic. I thought Noah would have played a little bit next year, but Jaden Ballard is back, but I feel like he hasn't taken it and run with it when he's had the opportunity. And I I think it's going to be those four with, again, I think that maybe they'll rotate a little deeper than that, but I think it's going to be a lot of just those four getting mixed and matched around the formation.
And Carnell Tate can play any of the positions. So like they're going to rotate. Everybody's going to play everything. And you're going to want to move both Smith and Tate into the slot to find matchups that you want as well. So it'll be very interesting to see what Brian Hartline does there. Marc, assuming he's retained.
Yes. Assuming he's retained. Yes. So we got a little too far down into the doldrums here the last few weeks where, even Hartline was kind of under some fire for his development of receivers or he's not playing enough guys. Like, okay, well, you take Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka off the field, I guess. I mean, what do you want? But yeah. So speaking of Hartline, this was maybe a good wrapping up point. 5-star wide receiver Jamie French, one of the top 2 or 3 receivers in the 2025 class. Out of Jacksonville, Florida, committed to Alabama over the summer, visited Ohio State for the Penn State game in the fall, told me he's making an official visit to Ohio State this offseason, loves the Buckeyes, loves Hartline, playing with South Florida Express again this offseason on the 7-on-7 circuit. Alabama's lost their receivers coach to Texas A&M. The Sharks are smelling blood in the water. Georgia's picking things up. Notre Dame, Texas A&M, of course, the Florida schools. Interesting. And I have to call some people out. I'm not going to call them out individually, but you know who you are. If you were in my comments on the story, if you were in the comments on Facebook saying, we don't need any more receivers. Well, yes, you do. You're playing 3 at a time. You only have like 6 right now. Don't be ridiculous. You can want 2 things at the same time. You can want them to improve offensive line recruiting. You can want them to land some pass rushers. But to say, oh, I don't care if we get Jamie French, stop it. Unbelievable
the
talent.
Same thing. Yeah, the same thing happens with the Quinshon Judkins commitment when the comments are like, is anybody going to be able to block for him? And trying to tell people like the Cotton Bowl offensive line is not the offensive line at Ohio State fielded the entire year or will field next year. Obviously, that was an embarrassing look for that performance, but yeah, it'll be okay. You don't have to be mad about landing Quinshon Judkins because you're still upset about the offensive line. It's okay to, and obviously the Michigan thing has not gone over well with Buckeye fans for many understandable reasons, but it's okay to be, to look at the bright side of some very good possibilities and happenings.
Just enjoy the commitment. Take a day. I mean, just take like 24 hours and be like, I'm going to enjoy Quinshon Judkins' commitment, and then go back to your, we need offensive tackles, we need defensive ends thing. That's fine. But I watched Jamie French. I've seen a lot of Jamie. I mean, he camped at Ohio State early in his career. I was at the Future 50 this past summer, which he was MVP of and dominated. He dominated the underclassmen combine at the All-American Bowl over the weekend. You want Jamie French. Just take my word for it. You want Jamie French. I told you wanted Carnell Tate. I told you wanted Jeremiah Smith. I told you wanted Garrett Wilson. You want this guy. You want Jamie French if they can get him. Now we'll see. There's a lot of stuff here. Alabama's got to hire a receivers coach. This is going to be a hyper competitive recruiting battle with all the nation's top programs involved. There's a long way to go. It's one of those things, you take the field over Ohio State right now, but like Brian Hartline is arguably his best relationship. And so you don't count out there's certain positions, I think, over the years where it's like, well, probably not going to go to Ohio State. I don't think you count out Brian Hartline in these types of situations. I think this is a guy you would very much be happy to get, but I think it's also a guy you keep an eye on because I do think there's a chance Hartline can pull this off.
Yeah, and you want more guys because it may sound like Ohio State is loaded with all of these receivers, but there was a time where they were going to take 4 in 2024. They ended up with 2. They took 4 in 2023. They're down to 2. They took 4 in 2022, down to 2. That's 6 receivers in 3 classes, assuming Demarion Witten doesn't stay at receiver for his entire career. And he probably will start there just because they may need the bodies. And in my opinion, there's no point in not using him if he's ready to play. He's not ready to play tight end yet, but if he's a playmaker, get him out there at some point. But you need guys. You can't just bring in 2 receivers every year, especially when Brian Hartline does not want to go to the portal and is taken pride in the fact that they haven't had to go to the portal. They will enter fall camp, I think, with 7 scholarship receivers, not counting Demarion Witten. That's a small number.
That's really light. It really is. And so here's the thing people need to kind of adjust to and deal with. I mean, it just is what it is. There's really nothing. You can talk about rotating, you can talk about all this, you can talk about this all day long, but in this current era, if you're recruiting 5 stars at the level that Brian Hartline's recruiting 5 stars, you're going to lose some guys to the portal because not everyone can catch 50 balls. Even if you rotate, if you rotate, you're not going to have 8 guys catching 50, 60. It's just impossible. There's not enough footballs. So you're going to have guys who are going to be told by other programs that they can be a number 1 for them. They're a number 3 at Ohio. Jameson Williams all over again. Jameson Williams could play. Everyone knew Jameson Williams could play, but he wasn't better than Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. That was it was obvious. And it's been obvious in the NFL he's not better than those guys either. Mm-hmm. So it's just, you're going to have some situations like that where you're going to lose a guy or 2 to the portal because they can legitimately be a 1 or a 2 somewhere else, and they're not a 1 or a 2 at Ohio State at that moment in time. And you're going to continue to lose guys 3 years and done. You're going to continue to have your Garrett Wilsons, your Marvin Harrisons, who 3 years and off to the NFL. So you're not going to get 4 years out of some of these guys. The way he's recruiting, the Emeka Ibukas and like the Chris Olaves, the guys who actually, we don't even know yet if Ibuka's going to be one, but we're going to kind of assume that right now. But the guys you get 4 years out of who are like really, really good are going to be few and far between because they're going to transfer out or they're going to go to the NFL early. So your cycle's even sped up. You're not recruiting on a 4-year cycle. You're recruiting on like a 2 or 3 year cycle. So you're going to have to keep taking guys. Yeah.
And if you have guys that stick around and aren't playing or producing, then are they good enough to play? And if that is half of your roster in terms of if that is half of your receiver room, then you're even thinner than the numbers show.
Yeah. I mean, the standard is just so high right now. Like it's just so high. Like, Julian Fleming's a solid player, but they're going to get more out of that position this year than they got out of Fleming the last few years. They're going to get more production there. And it's just, even if you hit on everyone, first round picks are going to go early, transfer portal guys. And then yes, as good as Brian Hartline is, 1 out of every 3 or 1 out of every 4 are just not going to be good enough. Like even a guy like Hartline's going to, not only be able to bat 75%, he's not going to bat 100%, he's not going to bat 1,000. So you're going to have these situations. So if you can't embrace that now, you're going to be miserable. So embrace the fact that they're going to bring in like 3 5-star kids a year because they have to.
And you lose Jackson Smith and Jigba to injury in 2022. You lose Emeka Ibuka to injury in 2023. There's also that factor as well.
Yep. And Jackson was an early entry guy. So, I mean, you got like 2 years out of Jackson, essentially. You got like a year out of Jackson, for being honest. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate. But so these things are going to crop up. That doesn't mean you stop recruiting receivers, as someone suggested to me on Twitter. You don't stop recruiting receivers. Come on. Let's stockpile as many of like isn't this what you want? This is what Alabama has done for years. Take all the 5 stars you can get, and the herd will thin naturally. And the cream will rise to the top. You'll lose some talented guys to other programs who will end up going to other programs and having good careers. That's fine. But your best guys will rise to the top, and you will consistently have great receivers. That's how this works. I wish they would be able to do this on the offensive line and be losing guys to the transfer portal that like go to Alabama in the transfer portal or go to USC in the transfer portal instead of going to like Toledo and Miami of Ohio in the transfer portal. Because there's a reason that's happening. It's what is happening in the receiver room now. I know people want to be negative about it. It's a positive thing. If they could get this to be happening in other position rooms right now, the roster would be in better shape. And I'm not saying the roster is in bad shape, but if you could do this if you could replicate this on the offensive line, people would be a lot happier. So don't worry that this is happening at receiver. Am I wrong?
No. Get as many as you can because processing now is a 2-way street, and you'd rather have more than less. And there have been many times where, they're less in other positions. And now just imagine that at every position. And so wherever you can get them, and then be happy with that.
So there we go. Cliff notes for the last 50 minutes. Signing 5-star or getting 5-star wide receiver commits, still good, still a good thing. And defensive recruiting for the Buckeyes likely taking off here this month. Starting with, of course, Devin Sanchez being the first domino. Expect more good stuff here the rest of the month. Appreciate everyone watching. Check us out on BuckeyeHuddle.com if you're not already. It's going to be a big off season. We got new recruiting profiles up on the site. We got recruiting big boards, offer lists, all of the resources I think people have grown to expect out of, like the networks. We've added that stuff now to our site. So you don't have to, when we write an article about a recruit, you can click on his name and go to his profile. You don't have to click off the site and look him up somewhere else. So a lot of cool stuff we're adding on the website. We got Tony's released his mock depth chart for the 2024 season already, 1.0. Check that out. Lots of cool stuff going on the website. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. Obviously costs nothing, just kind of helps other Ohio State fans find us on youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. And please, if you're not subscribed on audio feed, whether it's iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts, give us a subscription there. And if you have a minute, a 5-star rating will help us find help other Ohio State fans find us as well on there. So appreciate everyone watching and listening. And I have a feeling we're going to have a special Skull Session Recruiting Podcast episode in the not too distant future. So keep an eye on the feed for that as well. But again, thanks for watching and listening, and we will talk to you all soon.